Hi everybody, thank you very much for joining us for today's College and Research Libraries Forum. This is our 5th one in the series, which is very exciting. My name is Sarah Steiner and I am the social media editor for the journal. And today we're going to be talking about a wonderful article that is currently available in preprint on the College and Research Library site. It is called A Survey of Campus Coordinators of Undergraduate Research Programs. And the purpose of these fora is to highlight great research that's coming out in the journal and also give everybody a chance to chat with the authors and to ask them any questions that you might have about the research. So to that end, I'm going to show you a slide that's going to give you all the contact options, which also came to you in an email earlier today. You can send questions via web form, and the URL is there. You can also send them on Twitter via College and Research Libraries, which is CRL_ACRL, and the hashtag is UndergradCRL. And last but not least, you can send questions via Facebook. And me and my colleague, Elizabeth Marcus, are going to be gathering all these questions up as the session is live and sending them on to Allegra, the moderator, to make sure that they get to the panel. So I'm going to pull that down. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce you briefly to Allegra, our moderator today. She's the Scholarly Communication Team Leader and Science, Technology, and Society Librarian at Claremont College's Library in California. Thanks very much, Allegra, for agreeing to moderate today, and thanks to all the authors for joining us for this session.
Right, thanks, Sarah. Yeah, as it doesn't show up on my little bar here, but I am from the Claremont Colleges. And also, I can't type in the chat for some reason, so if you're expecting me to answer you, I'm sorry, I'll have to do it verbally. But thank you for being here. You may have been drawn to this discussion because you're familiar with the great work that these authors have done, or maybe you're here because you're from a library that's interested in supporting undergraduate research. Or maybe like me, you're here for both reasons. So I'm really looking forward to this discussion, and I'll give you a short statement as to why, and then the authors will introduce themselves, and then we'll take off with the questions. So as mentioned in the paper, interest in supporting undergraduate research programs continues to grow within academic librarianship. And while the libraries are building up their information literacy instruction, publishing undergraduate journals, and archiving undergraduate research in their institutional repositories, this research shows that most faculty and coordinators of undergraduate research programs are really unaware of what the library is doing in these respects. So this is why this research that we're going to discuss today is really important. It gives us an essential insight into the faculty and administrator perspective. So ultimately, if this cohort doesn't know about the services and support we're building around undergraduate research, or if they don't find value in what we're doing, if we're building these programs and services that aren't relating to our stakeholders' perspective, then our efforts will be much more difficult to sustain. So I believe this is true because there's a lot of things that we're doing here at the Claremont College's library that are mentioned in the paper. And I believe that we can use this data analysis from the research to improve what we're doing already, as well as build out some of the services we hope to develop, such as research data management education, and have a greater impact on our community. So in fact, I was so inspired by the paper that we're going to hold a reading and viewing group in my library so that we can strategize on how to build on these findings to improve our collaboration conversations with our campus partners. So I hope you'll find similar inspiration in the research these authors have done, as well as in the conversation we're about to have today. So please do weigh in with your questions. We have some questions formulated to start off with, but I'll read yours to the group as they come up. And now if Miranda, Sarah, and Stephanie will introduce yourselves, we'll get started. Stephanie, you want to start?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Stephanie Davis-Call, and I'm the Scholarly Communications Librarian at Illinois Wesleyan University, located in Bloomington, Illinois. And I'm really happy to be here today. Thanks.
And I'm Sarah Shreves. I'm the Associate Dean for Digital Strategies at the University of Miami in lovely Coral Gables, Florida. And I do want to mention that I was previously at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign when we actually conducted the research, but moved to Miami in January.
And I'm Miranda K. Hensley. I'm at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and I am the Instructional Services Librarian as well as a coordinator of the Scholarly Commons.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. So Miranda, we'll start off with you. So why did you all choose to study this topic?
Yeah, so this is interesting because it started with some work that Sarah was doing with the Ethnography of the University Initiative on our campus, which is a really unique undergraduate research program. It's interdisciplinary, it's mostly in the humanities and the social sciences. And she was working as the ideals coordinator, our institutional repository, to get the student work into the institutional repository. And Sarah can correct me if I'm wrong, but this started 5 or 6 years ago now. And so that student work is being archived, the student projects, and also their work throughout the semester is archived in Ideals. And so Sarah brought me into this as the instruction librarian, thinking about how we could work with students and thinking about the scholarly communication issues underlying this. So that's where we started at Illinois. I know that Stephanie sees the opportunities in thinking about this from a purely undergraduate research institution, that engaging the students in a different way for that perspective. So that's where the conversation started, and we come at this from different perspectives, but we realized really quickly in our conversations that there wasn't any data benchmarked in this area in the LIS literature. So that's where we started from.
All right, thanks. So Sarah, maybe you can talk a little bit about the study and the methodology that you used.
Yeah, sure. So I do want to mention that this is sort of a second phase of research that we've been doing. The first part of this research was basically a survey of library support for formal undergraduate research programs. So this was basically, as Miranda mentioned, a benchmark of the support for undergraduate research programs in libraries. And this was a survey that was sent to library deans, and they distributed it accordingly. And so this was published in College and Research Libraries as well in July 2014. So it's worth taking a look at that article, I think, because it provides some more context for the current work that we're talking about today. So what we were interested in was really trying to understand how administrators of undergraduate research programs understood and perceived the contributions of the library. So how they valued the contributions of the library. And so we designed a survey to try to get at that question. I want to talk a little bit about the sort of population that we surveyed. So going back to our original survey, the benchmarking survey that we published in July 2014, we actually used the same population that we used for that original survey for this one under discussion today. And that survey was a population made up of the membership of the Council on Undergraduate Research, or CUR, the members of the Association of Research Libraries, the members of the Oberlin Group, and members of Knightley. And so this was about 758 institutions that we sent the survey to total. And what we were trying to do was to get a pretty broad spectrum of types of institutions, and to make sure that we were targeting both small liberal arts, colleges, master's levels, institutions, as well as large research universities. We sent the survey to the person that we determined to be responsible for the undergraduate research program. So we used we want to thank students at Illinois Wesleyan for compiling this database. We essentially used the CUR, the Council on Undergraduate Research, their database of contacts. We also did a website search. And we were able to identify somebody at every single institution that had some level of responsibility for undergraduate research. Now, I want to be clear here that some of these were at a campus level, and some were actually at a college or school level. And in some cases, we were identifying faculty mentors. So I'll talk a little bit about the respondents in terms of that sort of breakout in a second. So that was the population we sent the survey to. We sent it to 758 institutions. We had 287 respondents, which was a pretty good response rate, a 38% response rate. Interestingly, of that 287, 30% of that had actually responded, or their library had responded to our earlier survey that we had conducted, which was interesting. In terms of sort of the breakout of the population, just for people's interest, about 25% of the respondents were, or 29% of the respondents were baccalaureate level, about 35% were master's level, and about 31% were doctoral granting universities. So this is the Carnegie classifications. And then I guess the other thing that's probably worth noting in terms of the responses that we were getting, and Stephanie will talk a little bit about the actual results, but the responses we were getting, about 59% of the respondents were administrators for cross-campus programs. 22% were administrators for programs within a school or department, which tended, not always, but tended to be more disciplinary focused, so a narrower focus. And then 11% were actually faculty mentors. So a substantial portion, you know, a little over 70 or 80% were responsible for an undergraduate, were administrators responsible for an undergraduate research program at a school or campus level. So had a pretty broad view of the program and of those responsible in the program. So a really quick overview of the methodology there.
Thanks for that. So Stephanie, can you talk to us a little bit about the results and what did you find to be most surprising?
Sure. So one of the questions we asked respondents was whether or not the library actually provided support specific to their undergraduate research program. And 54% of respondents said it did or support was under development. Of that portion of the respondents, we asked if they could agree or disagree with the statement, the library is important to the success of the undergraduate program. And 87% of those respondents agreed or strongly agreed with that statement. So we were not surprised by that, but we were definitely very happy about that. We were not so sure about the people who responded that they disagreed with that statement, and reasons for their responses covered everything from, you know, we think these things should be faculty responsibilities to we never really thought of the library having a role in supporting our program. So 34% of the initial 200 and some respondents said that the library did not provide support for their programs, and they were sent to a question that asked them why. And for this question, the respondents said that the library offered the same services to all undergraduates, not just the somewhat select group of undergraduate researchers who choose to go to this level of research. And then the other reason was that they had just never thought of it. So the same services to all students was something that we also found in our first article, the benchmarking survey that Sarah mentioned. And that was something that we continue to kind of grapple with and talk about, especially for a campus like ours. We have 1,895 students, so there are some resource questions for supporting a small group of students versus the larger group, and we saw that in the first article where people said, you know, our resources, both time and money and people, are limited, so we're choosing to support everybody in the same ways, rather than scaling up support for specialized support for undergraduate researchers. So we also asked undergraduate coordinators about ranking library services in terms of value for support of their students' work and for the undergraduate research program. And we were happy to see that instruction for research and publication was the highest ranked as more valuable. Collections were also pretty high up in there, but instruction was definitely the highest. And this took form in a lot of different ways. It could be the general traditional library instruction session, but it also could be short courses, specialized software training, research seminars. It could be about survey tools or literature reviews, also working with archival materials. Also, things that we have not typically thought of as being supported by the library, such as practicing for presentations or designing posters. So we thought that was really interesting too, because it broadens the scope of how libraries can have influence and impact on the undergraduate researchers on their campus. And lastly, I just want to touch on dissemination of research. There were several mentions of things like undergraduate research journals and publishing services, in addition to archiving and creating access through institutional repositories or other means to undergraduate research. And that seems to be a growing interest in this population as well as in academic libraries. And so that was something that, while we didn't find it surprising, we definitely found it interesting and worthy of some follow-up in the future.
Okay, and maybe continuing on that vein, do any of you see opportunities for collaboration with stakeholders outside the library that you haven't really mentioned or talked about? Have things since you've done this study kind of popped up in your head?
Mm-hmm. So one of the things, I just want to reiterate one of the things that Stephanie said, which is really thinking about instruction in new ways, and that the new C&RL framework is a really good venue for that, and thinking about conceptual learning. It's such a good opportunity in thinking about not just undergraduate research, but the other high-impact educational practices defined by the
AAC&U.
Yeah, thanks. So, being able to work with the faculty mentors, coordinators of programs, graduate assistants, teaching assistants that are working with undergraduate students at this level, and thinking, more broadly and specifically about what it means to teach undergraduate students and the things that we traditionally think about for graduate students, that undergraduates will eventually be grad students who will eventually be faculty, right? So things like improving research strategies, lit review and annotation, preparation of research results, but other things too, like data management, which we don't tend to think about for undergrads. So there's those kinds of opportunities. The instruction seems to be the most robust opportunity for us right now and the most valued by the coordinators in their responses. And like Stephanie said, also the dissemination of work. But I could highlight one particular project that Sarah actually started here at the University of Illinois, first with grad students and then with undergraduate students, which is our Image of Research project. It's a competition where students submit an image of their research and a short narrative. And there are awards for first, second, third, and honorable mention. And we have faculty and librarians who are judges for that competition. And then the results for the undergraduates in particular, we print those out on poster board and put them up during the undergraduate research symposium, where the students are already doing presentations and posters. And I heard again from the provost this year that it was one of the favorite things that was happening at the symposium. So it gives students an opportunity, maybe not to present their work in the same formal way, but to give them an opportunity to do this data visualization. And we have great submissions from sciences, humanities, social science, really across the board. So that's another good way of reaching out for us, and also talking about the opportunity, the instruction opportunity there for working with students on publishing their work, archiving it in the institutional repository. those kinds of things. So great opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this really does give us an opportunity to have developed some really deep partnerships with faculty who are quite involved in supporting sort of formal undergraduate research programs, who are doing mentoring, um, and to provide sort of the instruction that we've been talking about in a very targeted way in support of those faculty and these programs, rather than necessarily sort of doing sort of these broad instructional sessions where we don't know if anybody will come, but having these strong partnerships, whether it's part of a course or part of this sort of umbrella of a formal undergraduate research program that students are asked to sort of step through, I think is really interesting. One of the other interesting things that I think we saw both in our earlier research but also mentioned here was the fact that in some libraries, a relatively small number, but in some libraries, librarians were beginning to serve as mentors themselves for these research programs, which seems to me a really interesting and powerful way to become involved in this program and in, you know, the intellectual life of the university, to be that integrated into an undergraduate research program. I think that sounds really exciting to me.
Yeah, I think
so for us, for us it means looking for either programs or offices outside the library that we can help either showcase what they're doing or work with them from the idea inception phase all the way through to the dissemination phase. So one example is we're going to be talking with our writing program and our writing center to see if we can build either a series of workshops or a pre-semester retreat for students who are interested in pursuing undergraduate research, so we can get them in the mindset of good behaviors and good habits for doing large-scale research projects across all disciplines. So that's something that that we're just starting now, and hopefully the results of this research will really inform those efforts as well.
Yeah, and I was just going to mention that one of the things we're doing, so we have similar institutions to Stephanie's, smaller institutions, and the research abroad, study abroad programs are really important, and they actually produce a lot of research products, you know, reports and different things, and so we're hoping to collaborate with them along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you've talked about the framework and how scholarly communication and information literacy discussions in C&RL related to the study. Is there anything else that you'd like to mention as far as the framework?
Yeah, I just want to remind librarians that we think about course integrated instruction as being the holy grail of teaching, and we are so disappointed when we lament the one shot. And high impact practices, especially undergraduate research, is such a great opportunity for us to work with faculty to rethink the way that we teach and to better clarify the role that we could play in instruction around these areas. And you know, even in instruction, even in undergraduate research, the students are doing experiential learning. It matters to them. It's important. They have reasons for doing the things that they're doing, and it's pressing to them. And this is the exact kind of thing that we're looking for. So it's a really good opportunity to look at the framework in a new way and use that to write new learning outcomes and thinking about ways to reach students, like Stephanie said, all the way through that dissemination phase.
I think also that one of the things I like about the framework is it shifts the focus on students as consumers of information to creators of new knowledge and original research. And so undergraduate research is the prime way, one of the prime ways that students can really achieve that transformation. And I think that if we're prepared to help them with all the steps on that journey, if you will, then we'll be in a much better place to help our faculty who are working with these students as well. So moving students from an attitude of this is the way I'm going to use this information to this is the way I want people to see me or my work as researchers, I think is a really great way we can contribute to these programs.
I like that word, transformation, Stephanie.
We just had commencement. It was,
yeah.
It was a big topic.
Right.
Okay, so we have some questions coming in from the audience, and it kind of goes along the lines of, Stephanie, what you were talking about a moment ago. Can you share ways in which you've been successful in creating these relationships with faculty and research project planning?
Well, I mean, I think so. I'm thinking of our experience at Illinois with the ethnography of the university initiative. So that was, I think, has been a very interesting project for the library because we've been involved in several parts of it, and we're involved in it, I guess, from a so in terms of setting up the organization and the framework of the initiative itself. So the library really became, in some ways, central to the EUI project, in that some of the work would not be possible without the library. So, for example, some of the courses were very focused on using archival content. So our university archives is really involved in working with the researchers. So trying to find, I think, looking for entry points around established programs might be one way to think about doing that. I also think that there are opportunities as you begin to look at things like research symposia and other things to have these conversations with faculty to begin to show value, and you can begin to have these entry points. I think this is where, and I see there's some questions coming up, I think this is one of those questions also where working with our liaison librarians who know faculty and hopefully sort of know the work that's going on around undergraduate research could actually be a way to find these types of entry points. I don't know, Stephanie and Miranda, if you have things to add there.
Do you have anything to say about the subject librarians and liaisons collaborating with how to coordinate these efforts with them reaching out to undergraduate research programs or other constituencies that might give use?
Well, I'm looking at our original survey because I think there was some really interesting. We actually had some questions around not specifically the liaison librarian, but who was responsible. And it was interesting because you had some cases where it was liaison librarians who were responsible for doing this outreach in their areas, but we saw a number of institutions that were actually designating a librarian to be the undergraduate research program's librarian or to be a liaison to that program. So we saw both models. I don't know, Miranda and Stephanie, if you have anything to add. I'm sort of reaching back into my memory about that earlier study.
Well, I know here that that each of us in our liaison areas do this as a matter of course. So it's not like I'm working with an undergraduate researcher today. It's more like it's not as sort of formal as it might be at a larger institution. It's all mixed in together. But I do think there's value in reaching out very specifically to the students who are are doing the undergraduate research, either through, like here it's our associate provost who sort of administrates that program, which happens in all our departments. So identifying those students early on and getting on their radar early on is, of course, you know, absolutely key and vital to them connecting with the librarian, because sometimes they don't know what they don't know. So.
Yeah, and one of the things that we had conversations early on when we got our results from the first study is that there's a lot of libraries who are treating undergraduate researcher students the same as they're treating all their other undergraduate students, that they don't see the difference between the two. And you know, we talked a lot about that. Why are these students different? Why are their needs different? You wouldn't necessarily want to call out a specific collection for them, for example, but you would want to think about how students are managing data and what that means for those students working in a lab, for example. I'm working on another project with a colleague at Purdue, and I did some interviews in the last couple of weeks. And it was interesting to hear the students talk about their lab notebooks and what happens to them when they're done and what their understanding is of how that data lives on. And most of them said, oh, I finished my lab notebook and I put it up on the shelf, and I don't know, it stays there for a couple of years until they decide to throw it away. So it's interesting to hear about how they're thinking about those things, and they are. So you know, my ultimate point is how are these students engaged in these activities different and similar to students that aren't participating in these opportunities?
I think that's a really good point. I think that kind of brings us to a question for Sarah. I think this idea of coordinating across the library is important, so that you know, working from top down, bottom up, sideways, to make sure everybody understands what it is you're trying to do, as well as coordinate efforts so that you're meeting the needs of the faculty in these programs and that sort of thing. So, Sarah, how can library administrators use this research kind of from the top down to help plan and implement services to undergraduate researchers?
So I think it's a good question. So I guess a couple of things. I think one is administrators need to have a good understanding of how the librarians are doing this outreach and working with faculty. I also think that the administrator can have a role in sort of doing some of the both initial but ongoing outreach to the organizations around the campus. So sort of working with the administrator who manages the undergraduate research program, if there's a campus-wide one, having the conversations with deans and others to sort of keep the library's role sort of highlighted among administrators and other units across the university. I think that's certainly a really important role for library administrators. And I think understanding also getting an understanding of the types of resources that both librarians and administrators are looking for to support this type of work. So, you know, for example, some of the things that were valued and administrators were interested in is ways that the libraries could help highlight the research that was coming out, so as part of the dissemination process. But, you know, so that might mean providing support for things like a research symposia, or perhaps an award for best student paper or poster, or doing something like the Image of Research, where you're putting resources, so both sort of financial resources but also people resources, towards doing things that really have some high visibility, and understanding sort of what you need to have in place to do that. I think the other piece is, and something that I thought was really interesting, and we saw this in both of these surveys, was there were populations where obviously there was not good communication going on. It was not clear either to the library dean or administrator or to the administrator of the undergraduate research program that the library was doing anything or that the university was doing anything. So on either side. And I think that's such an important role for library administrators to be talking up the type of work that we are doing and that we could be doing, potentially, understanding the resources and the people that we have in place. So that sort of outward work is important, and then making sure that you have the organizational structure sort of inside to actually provide the type of support that your university or college needs to do this type of work.
Can you talk a little bit about the how assessment has come into play with or how we can do assessment on working with undergraduate research programs?
Do you guys want to speak to that?
Well, I think there are a couple different ways that we can think about assessment. We can think about it in terms of is the student's project, does the student's project support or fulfill or go beyond what the department has set up as their core or key learning outcomes for their major or program or whatever academic unit. And that's a great way to collaborate with faculty. Another road in this is were the students, happy with what they had access to in the library? And that's, I think, at a not a lower level, but a different level. And at least here, looking at the end product to see how the students use the sources, if they were integrating evidence into their work properly, if they were using conventions of the disciplinary language or disciplinary writing conventions. I think that's a really interesting area and one where we could learn a lot about how our students are learning and engaging with their disciplines. But in terms of one other thing is, how are they engaging with our collections? Are they making good use of interlibrary loan? Are they making good use of our special collections on site or the memberships we have with C&RL and, the Center for Research Libraries, and other entities that we have reciprocal agreements with. So I think there's a lot of different ways we can do assessment of our activities with undergraduate research programs.
I mean, I think the really hard thing, the thing that we really want to understand, right, is what our impact is on these programs, and I think that. I think Stephanie has outlined some really great ways we can begin to try to get at that, but I think that's one of the hardest things to try to understand. So what the what the real impact is of our work, because there's so many other variables involved in an undergraduate research program, it can be hard to tease that apart. But the more that we can ask the types of questions I think that Stephanie outlined, the more we can at least begin to understand a little bit of that.
Speaking of variables, so how does the research as well as your recommendations kind of play out at these different types of academic institutions? So from these small kind of liberal arts, mostly undergraduate, to the huge kind of University of Illinois institutions.
Well, for us, it's we're small and cozy, so it's for us it's entrepreneurial. It's seeing an opportunity and going for it. And I know my colleagues here in the library have different ways of working with different departments. So in a way, understanding what everyone is doing and making sure that communication and sharing is happening within the library, so we're all aware of our different activities with art or psychology or biology, is really key. And then another level of that is understanding what all the different departments are doing. And so the way it plays out here, you know, our students are in the library, you know, all the time. It's a really central place on campus, and harnessing that and making use of their presence and also our relationships with faculty is something that, I mean, that's our bread and butter. Our liaison work is a very, very high priority, and building on the connections we have with faculty. We also just concluded a Mellon grant that helped us bring together writing courses and information literacy. And while we don't have the final report, the word on the street is that it worked really well, and it helped the students understand the range of resources and the kinds of information they had access to, and also help them use those resources more effectively to get their work done and get their work done well. And for faculty, it helped them understand better our role as contributors to their classroom, to the work that their students were doing. And undergraduate research builds on, I think, those really positive experiences that students have in the lower division level courses and relationships with faculty.
I think I'm going to take the sort of larger research university perspective. I think one of the interesting challenges there, I think, is that in one place, well, there's plenty of places, but a place where I think many of the liberal arts colleges are way ahead of us is being able to work across a lot of disciplines in undergraduate research programs. I think in larger research universities, this is not true across the board, but I think you do find sort of stronger undergraduate research programs within the sciences, often based on lab work, and it can be more difficult for us to sort of find entry points into that type of undergraduate research, right? So where we find entry points is usually sort of at the end phase of that, where we might be doing something around the dissemination and publication, or perhaps, if we're lucky, doing something around data management. But there's not always as much of a broad spread across the disciplines, or it's harder to find the work that's happening in research universities in the humanities and social sciences. It's not to say that it's not there, but I think it sometimes is less well developed as it is in the sciences. So understanding, and this is an area that we're really interested in exploring further actually in our research, is understanding how disciplinary differences play out in support of undergraduate research programs and what differences it makes. You know, in the responses that we got, it was we just didn't have a large enough sample, I think, to really make any conclusions about the types of needs coming from different disciplines. And so, yeah, so that's something we'd like to explore further. But that's one area that, you know, I think that where the research can sort of at least help provide a framework of conversation for the library to have with these undergraduate research programs. And I guess that's what I would hope that this research can help provide, is that sort of, you know, these are sort of starting places for conversations about needs, et cetera. So I don't know, Miranda, if you have anything to add about the perspective from a larger institution.
No, I think that's really good. You hit the nail on the head.
Okay, there's a few questions that have come in around maybe liaisons working with the coordinators. Do you find that the liaison librarians are duplicating efforts of the research program coordinators? Are liaison librarians linking their LibGuides or other tools to research program coordinators' website, etc.?
I don't know that we saw that there was duplication of effort particularly. Miranda, I don't know whether you can make any comments about the link, how people were linking instructional materials since you were looking at that.
Well, so I did a follow-up study from the first survey where we surveyed libraries. 86% of those libraries said that they were doing instruction. So I went back and asked those libraries, okay, you told me you're doing instruction. What kind of instruction are you doing? And I had over 40% response rate. It was really great to see the kinds of activities that librarians are engaged in. And as part of that, we had some instruction materials, but they were creating them originally on their own, much in the same way that they would create instruction materials for any class. So I wouldn't say there's a lot of duplication there. And when we talk about the coordinators as part of this particular paper that we're talking about today, they really aren't, while they value information literacy and library instruction, they're not getting that from other places. And I think they see that the librarian plays a really strong role in that. So I think we have this huge opportunity, this gap that exists in these types of programs.
There's been a lot of talk about space, and the library is offering space or reconfiguring space. And there's a question coming in, do the libraries have specific place within the library for undergraduate researchers to create knowledge or showcase their research? And I think this is talking about physical as opposed to digital.
Right. We did have some cases where libraries did provide not just space for, I guess, showcasing and dissemination. So there were a couple of areas around space in libraries. One was actually providing space for the undergraduate researchers to actually do their work. So being able to reserve carrels or other sorts of spaces for them to, to be working. And then, we had a couple of respondents talk about, so one responded, I'm just reading this from the paper, but they said, our libraries are also designing a new research commons in one of the libraries and have included the undergraduate research as part of that process. So I think we saw that a couple of in a few places where they were actually including spaces for undergraduate research. So, yeah.
Okay. There was a question, we talked a little bit about it, and I'd like you to expand a bit on the dissemination part. So particularly offering undergraduates a chance to publish their work at a research journal through an institutional repository. How does the library get involved in this?
I think Stephanie would be a good person to talk about that.
Sure. So at IWU we have several journals that have that are sponsored by departments, and we host them on our institutional repository. And we're a B-Press institution, so we have the ability to run an entire journal from submission all the way to publication through the repository. And so a couple of our student journals are actively using that module within Digital Commons, and one of those is the Undergraduate Economic Review. And I have to say that this is something that the Economics Department is a huge supporter of the journal. It's actually one of two journals that they have, and they provide the faculty advisor, whose name is Michael Seaborg, and the students are kind of mentored into becoming involved in the journal. So there's big incentive for, a line on their resume. There's also incentive to become involved in a scholarly pursuit that is open and born digital. And I don't think students see it quite that way, but I think they do see it as something where they can give back and look at what other students across the world are working on in terms of their undergraduate research. So the library got involved after we implemented Digital Commons back in early 2008 because we had an unfortunate incidence of we had a blip with a server where the UER resided, and in the course of bringing it back up, we talked with the faculty advisor, and we could do, there were a lot more features that we could use through Digital Commons than through the campus website. In terms of download reports and findability through Google and all these different things. So that really started the collaboration between the library and the econ department for that journal. I know others are doing this as well. I believe Marinda is just beginning her own work in this area with a number of different departments. So if she wants to talk about that right now, I can hand it back over to her.
Talking about journals in general, you mean?
Undergraduate journals, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So we have some journals on our campus, but none of them were published online, and we formulated a new Office of Undergraduate Research just about 3 years ago that's headed up by a professor who recently retired on our campus. And this was a really big deal in that undergraduate research is happening at our research institutions across the board, but nobody really knew how much was happening. And so the Office of Undergraduate Research has worked with me to bring journals to different departments. The English students just published their second volume just this week, and the Ethnography of the University Initiative has their journal now too. I helped them start that. And we also have been working with organizations like the McNair Scholars who aren't interested in publishing a journal per se, but they have this print journal that they want to archive. So we're working on putting all of that in the institutional repository. And then these opportunities also lead to instruction, which is the piece that I'm most interested in. So for example, I worked with the English students to train their students how to be peer reviewers, and EY as well, working with the Writing Center. And so what that means to be a peer reviewer, and that's not really something necessarily that the library should be teaching, but it was something that I could facilitate for them and bring all of that together. So everything about the journals, I think, points to ways to support dissemination of student work, but also the instruction piece behind that. There's all kinds of chances to work with students.
Can I elaborate on that point? So the dissemination point. Are any of you finding issues with, so a lot of our undergraduate research, and there's a lot done at the Claremont colleges, depending on discipline or what they're working on, it can either be they're producing proprietary products, or since you're working with undergraduates, the research is taking a little longer. They go through a series, and the faculty are not ready to publish. So kind of the pushback that I get from disseminating this content is that they don't want to get scooped, they don't want to get this information out there. How do you work with that, or have you come across it in any of your institutions?
Well, in our case at Illinois, I've been facilitating some conversations with departments who are interested in finding ways for students to do this kind of work, but again, have some of those problems, Allegra. And so we're talking about publishing journals in alternative ways, multimedia, publishing essays about what went right and what went wrong with my research snapshots of their work, things like that, that don't necessarily interfere with what the faculty member is doing, but the student gets to talk about their role in that process. So that's one way. Stephanie might have other ways that she's doing that.
Yeah, we face that rarely. It seems to happen maybe once or twice a year where a faculty member says, can we hold off on posting this, or can we just put a print version in? And sometimes the students elect to do that themselves with not the faculty member. And so we'll either embargo or just put a print copy in the archives. But I think it's a worthwhile conversation to have with those students about how, what kind of control you want over your work and how you want to share, how often you want to share. And like Marinda, we try to make allowances for different parts of the project to be archived in or presented in digital commons or in other ways. So maybe the PowerPoint from a conference presentation that you did, or maybe a reading of your poem or prose instead of the text of it. Something that highlights what the students have achieved, something that gives the outside world an idea of their accomplishments and what they're capable of, but not exactly the thing itself. And maybe this goes against our mission and goals for our repository, but I think that the work around the work or different iterations of the work is still an indication of what the students can do, and also sends the message that we value the work that you've done and where you've gotten to in your your 4-year college career. And I see that there's a question about crafting language about the research happening around us so that it doesn't devalue the work that our students are doing as they're learning and building their research skills. I think it's helpful for me to think of these students as like expert novices. So they are conversant in the language of their discipline, and they understand the conventions of writing, and they've gotten to a point where their work is sophisticated enough that they're making an original contribution back to their discipline, but they're not a faculty member. They're perhaps not a grad student yet, and some of our undergraduate researchers don't go on to that step. So, but at an early stage, like with lower division students, especially if you want to encourage them to go on to be undergraduate researchers or to consider applying for things like Fulbrights or Marshall scholarships or Rhodes scholarships. Starting early is really important. So if we can seed those opportunities at the freshman and sophomore levels with writing awards, or like this person has an image of research competition like Marinda and Sarah have, I think those are really great ways we can contribute and help develop undergraduate researchers.
Okay, we have just a couple minutes left. Do any of you have a closing statement, something you'd like to say that wasn't covered? Just about a minute each.
Maybe just talk about next steps really quickly, and we'd like to take the data from the first and the second survey, the librarians' responses and the coordinators' responses from the same institution, and see how their impressions are similar or different. That's one piece. I'll let Stephanie and Sarah chime in.
Go ahead, Stephanie.
Oh. I think that more collaborations or connections between different types of institutions, like what we did, I think would be really helpful. It's been interesting to hear Sarah and Marinda talk about their work on their campus and relate it back to what we're doing here. And I think more information from liberal arts colleges would be great. So I hope my colleagues at liberal arts institutions write about what they're doing, because I think we're doing some pretty interesting things.
I would love, so one of the things that we had talked about with our first phase, the sort of benchmarking that we did, was talking about whether it was worth trying to have some type of larger, more formal conversation around this topic, to talk about best practices, to share stories, to talk about things like assessment, which I think is such an important question to try to understand impact. And I would love to see the community explore whether that's something that we could actually, do to try to, whether that's an in-person forum or some other type of forum, to actually begin to have a larger conversation about this area.
All right, I think we have 1 minute left. Anybody else have anything else to say, or was this College and Research Library?
I've really enjoyed this. Thank you.
I think it's back to you.
Great, thank you. Thank you all so much. This was a really excellent panel. I thought it was wonderful. I learned a lot, and I hope everybody who attended learned a lot also. Thanks again to Allegra and all three of our panelists, and to Elizabeth Marcus, who helped me out behind technical stuff. And hope everybody has a great day.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.